The mist hung low over the Kentucky fields that October morning in 1841, as if the land itself was trying to hide its shame. Eliza Morgan stood at the edge of the tobacco field, her calloused hands clutching a worn basket. At 19, her eyes already carried the weight of someone who had lived several lifetimes. The plantation she had known her entire life, Rose Hill, stretched out before her, 800 acres of fertile land that had been watered with the blood and tears of 4 generations of her family. "Hurry up, girl!" The overseer's voice cut through the dawn like a whip. Mr. Daniels was new to Rose Hill, younger than most, with eyes that held none of the weariness that typically came with his position. That made him dangerous. "Master Wallace wants a full day's work before the storm comes." Eliza lowered her gaze. "Yes, sir." She moved deeper into the field, the hem of her tattered dress catching on the dew-damp plants. Around her, other figures emerged from the fog, men, women, and children whose faces were as familiar to her as her own reflection. They were her people, bound to this land and to each other by chains both visible and invisible. Master Thaddeus Wallace owned Rose Hill Plantation, one of the largest tobacco operations in Kentucky. At 68, his hair had turned silver, and his once imposing frame had begun to stoop, but his power had only grown with age. He was a third-generation slaveholder, his grandfather having established Rose Hill after receiving a land grant for his service in the Revolutionary War. The irony of fighting for liberty while denying it to others was not lost on Eliza. The Wallace family mansion stood on a slight rise, half a mile from the fields. A grand 2-story structure with white columns that seemed to glow in the morning light. It was a beautiful prison, and Eliza knew its hidden corners all too well. As a house slave until 3 months ago, she had polished its floors, cooked in its kitchen, and learned to disappear into its shadows when Master Wallace's mood turned dark. "You daydreaming again?" Sarah whispered as she moved alongside Eliza. At 42, Sarah had been Eliza's mother's closest friend, and after Mama died birthing Master Wallace's child 2 years ago, Sarah had stepped in to fill that void. "Keep your head down today. The Master has business guests arriving." Eliza nodded, plucking the ripe tobacco leaves with practiced efficiency. "Is that why they moved me back to the fields? So his guests won't see me?" Sarah's eyes darted around to ensure no one was listening. "Partly, but also because of what you overheard. Master doesn't trust you anymore." 3 months ago, Eliza had been dusting the study when Master Wallace and his son Jeremiah had entered, unaware of her presence. Their conversation still haunted her dreams. "The Morgan bloodline has always produced the best workers," Master Wallace had said, his voice casual as if discussing livestock. "Strong, intelligent enough to follow orders, but not to cause trouble. And the women bear healthy children. Eliza is proof of that, 3rd generation of my direct breeding program." Jeremiah had laughed uncomfortably. "Father, these modern ideas about scientific breeding are proving profitable," the old man had interrupted. "My granddaughters through the Morgan line fetch twice what others do at auction. It's simply good business." Eliza had dropped the dusting cloth then, revealing her presence. The look in Master Wallace's eyes had sent ice through her veins, not anger but calculation, as if deciding whether to swat a fly or simply shoo it away. The next morning, she had been reassigned to field work. "Eliza!" The sharp voice of Mr. Daniels pulled her back to the present. "Master wants you at the house, now!" Sarah's hand tightened briefly around Eliza's arm. "Remember what I taught you," she whispered. "Keep your eyes down, speak only when spoken to." The walk to the mansion seemed shorter than usual. Eliza's heart pounded against her ribs like a caged animal as she ascended the back steps to the kitchen entrance. Mrs. Harper, the housekeeper, waited with arms crossed over her ample bosom, her face a mask of disapproval. "Clean yourself up," she commanded, pointing to a bucket of water, "and put this on." She thrust a clean dress at Eliza, nicer than anything she'd worn since being sent to the fields. "What's happening?" Eliza dared to ask. Mrs. Harper's mouth tightened into a thin line. Master has guests who've expressed interest in expanding their own operations. He wants to show off his successes. The word hung in the air between them, its meaning unmistakable. Eliza felt a cold fear spreading through her body, replacing her blood with ice water. She knew what it meant to be displayed as a success of Master Wallace's breeding program. 20 minutes later, freshly scrubbed and wearing the clean dress, Eliza stood in the formal parlor with 5 other young women. All descendants of the Morgan line, all between 16 and 22, all sharing certain physical characteristics that Master Wallace had selectively bred for: height, strength, straight teeth, and clear skin. Master Wallace entered with 3 gentlemen in expensive suits. His eyes gleamed as he gestured to the line of women. "Gentlemen, I present to you the finest results of 3 generations of careful selection. The Morgan bloodline has produced workers who can labor from sunup to sundown without complaint, resist disease, and produce healthy offspring well into their 30s. One of the men, younger than the others with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward to examine them more closely. "Remarkable consistency in the phenotype, Wallace. And you say this was achieved through deliberate selection rather than chance?" "Absolutely." Master Wallace swelled with pride. "I maintain detailed stud books, just as one would for prized horses. Each breeding is recorded with results noted for future reference." Eliza kept her eyes fixed on the oriental carpet beneath her feet, counting the intricate patterns to steady her breathing. Next to her, her cousin Rebecca trembled slightly. "And which of these specimens has proven most productive?" asked another guest, a heavy-set man with ruddy cheeks. Master Wallace moved down the line until he stood before Eliza. This one's mother bore 7 healthy children before complications with the 8th. All survived to working age, an exceptional record. This girl herself shows all the desirable traits. I expect she'll be equally productive once properly settled." "Settled?" The younger man raised an eyebrow. "Paired with an appropriate stud," Master Wallace clarified. "I've selected Jacob, one of my strongest field hands. First breeding attempt scheduled for next month, after her current monthly course is complete." Eliza felt the room spin around her. Jacob was 35, a giant of a man who had never spoken a word to her. The casual way Master Wallace discussed her future, her body, her life, as if she were nothing more than a brood mare, made bile rise in her throat. "May I?" The younger man reached toward Eliza's face. Master Wallace nodded his permission, and cold fingers gripped her chin, forcing her face upward. The man studied her features with clinical detachment. Excellent bone structure, clear eyes, no signs of melancholy or resistance in her bearing. "You've done well, Wallace." "Years of careful work," Master Wallace replied, his voice warm with satisfaction. After the men had examined each woman like livestock at auction, they were dismissed. Eliza's legs carried her mechanically back to the kitchen, where Mrs. Harper waited. "Change back into your work clothes," the housekeeper ordered, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Perhaps she too had heard the discussion, had understood the horror of what Master Wallace was planning. "Mrs. Harper," Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible, "is it true about Jacob?" The older woman hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Master has it all scheduled in his ledger. After next full moon." Her eyes met Eliza's briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. A moment of shared humanity in a place where such connections were dangerous. As Eliza changed back into her field clothes, her mind raced. She had heard whispers of a network, people who helped those like her escape to freedom in the north. The Underground Railroad, some called it. Sarah had mentioned a Quaker family 10 miles north who were rumored to be sympathetic to the cause, but escape was nearly impossible, especially for a woman alone. Those who tried and failed suffered fates worse than death. Yet as she walked back to the tobacco fields under the watchful eye of Mr. Daniels, something hardened inside Eliza Morgan. The casual cruelty of Master Wallace's breeding program, the reduction of her very existence to a ledger entry, ignited a spark that years of oppression had failed to extinguish. That night, in the cramped cabin she shared with 7 others, Eliza lay on her thin pallet and stared at the ceiling. Next to her, Sarah's breathing had slowed into the rhythm of sleep, but Eliza remained awake, her mind filled with terrible clarity. She had less than a month before Master Wallace would force her into his breeding program, less than a month to decide whether to submit or to risk everything for a chance at freedom. The choice loomed before her like a fork in a dark road, both paths vanishing into shadow and uncertainty. Outside, the October wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, twice, 3 times. Eliza closed her eyes and began to plan. The days following the exhibition for Master Wallace's business associates passed in a blur of labor and quiet desperation. Eliza worked mechanically, her hands harvesting tobacco, while her mind turned over possibilities like stones in a riverbed, searching for one that might bear her weight. "You've been too quiet," Sarah murmured as they worked side by side. The morning fog had given way to a crisp autumn day, the kind that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. "What's brewing in that head of yours?" Eliza glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I need to know more about the Quaker settlement, the one you mentioned before." Sarah's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Child, that's dangerous talk. The Wheelers were caught helping a family escape last spring. Mr. Wheeler was imprisoned, and Mrs. Wheeler was fined so heavily they lost their farm. But there are others?" Sarah sighed, her voice dropping even lower. "There's a preacher named Solomon Bishop in the hills 15 miles north. They say he helps people find the path to salvation." The emphasis on her last word made its double meaning clear. "How would someone reach him?" Eliza pressed. "Eliza Morgan, you put such thoughts out of your mind." Sarah's voice was firm, but her eyes held fear rather than admonition. "Master Wallace has men patrolling the property boundaries day and night, 2 dogs trained to track runaways. And if you were caught—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Eliza knew what happened to those who tried to escape. Joseph had been caught 3 years ago, barely a mile from Rose Hill. Master Wallace had made them all watch as Joseph's punishment was carried out. 50 lashes that left his back a ruined landscape of flesh and blood, followed by the removal of 3 toes from his left foot to ensure he would never run again. "I can't stay," Eliza whispered. So softly the words seemed to dissolve in the air between them. "Not after what I heard, not knowing what he plans for me." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her weathered face revealing nothing to anyone watching from a distance. Finally, she spoke. "There's a creek that runs along the north edge of the property. Follow it upstream for 2 miles, and you'll find a lightning-struck oak that marks where Wallace land ends and the Hargrove property begins. The Hargroves use elderly Mr. Peterson as their night watchman. His eyes ain't good, and he sleeps more than he watches." Eliza's heart quickened. This was more information than she had dared hope for. "And beyond that?" "Another 3 miles north. There's a fork in the road. Take the less-traveled path eastward. Another 4 miles will bring you to a small church with a blue door. If the lantern is lit in the eastern window, it means it's safe to approach." Sarah's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if she were reciting something memorized long ago. "How do you know all this?" Eliza asked. A sad smile crossed Sarah's face. "My Daniel tried that route 15 years ago. He made it as far as the Ohio River before the slave catchers found him." Her eyes glazed with old pain. "But things have changed since then. The network is stronger now, better organized." The overseer's approach cut their conversation short, but the seed had been planted. That night, as the cabin settled into darkness, Eliza carefully counted the days. The new moon would come in 11 days, the darkest night, offering the best cover for movement across open country. Master Wallace's ledger had her scheduled for pairing with Jacob 5 days after that. The decision crystallized in her mind. She would run during the new moon. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Harper appeared at the field's edge, calling Eliza back to the house. "Master Wallace wants you to serve at dinner tonight," she explained as they walked. "His son Jeremiah has arrived with his new wife, and they're short-handed in the house." Jeremiah Wallace, at 32, was the heir to Rosehill. Unlike his father, he had spent time at university in Boston and was said to hold more progressive views, though not progressive enough to free the people his family held in bondage. His new wife was an unknown quantity, a Philadelphia socialite named Catherine, whom he had met during his northern business travels. That evening, dressed once again in clean serving clothes, Eliza moved silently around the Wallace dining room, filling water glasses and removing empty plates. Master Wallace sat at the head of the table, with Jeremiah to his right and Catherine to his left. Two local planters and their wives completed the party. "Magnificent tobacco crop this year, Wallace," said Mr. Henderson, one of the guests. "Your methods clearly yield results." Master Wallace smiled, swirling the brandy in his glass. "Science applied to agriculture, Henderson. The same principles that guide our livestock breeding program apply to all aspects of plantation management." Catherine Wallace, a slender woman with auburn hair piled fashionably atop her head, set down her fork. "I'm afraid I don't follow. What breeding program do you mean?" A moment of awkward silence descended on the table. Jeremiah cleared his throat. "Father has theories about selective planting of tobacco seeds, my dear. Rather technical agricultural discussions, I'm afraid." But the older Wallace waved away his son's intervention. "No need to shield your wife from the realities of plantation management, Jeremiah. Catherine is now a Southern woman and should understand how things are done." He turned to his daughter-in-law. "I've implemented a scientific approach to ensuring our workforce remains strong and productive through careful selection of breeding pairs." Catherine's face remained composed, but Eliza, standing behind her with a water pitcher, saw her knuckles whiten around her fork. "You speak of human beings, sir?" Catherine asked, her northern accent more pronounced. "I speak of property," Master Wallace corrected smoothly. "Valuable property whose worth can be enhanced through proper management. In fact," he gestured toward Eliza without looking at her, "this very girl represents the third generation of one of our most successful bloodlines." All eyes turned to Eliza, who kept her gaze fixed on the Persian carpet. She could feel Catherine Wallace's stare most intensely, not the clinical assessment of her father-in-law's business associates, but something more searching, more human. "She looks unwell," Catherine said suddenly. "Pale, overworked, I imagine." Master Wallace frowned. "Nonsense. The Morgan line is known for its hardiness. They rarely take ill." "Nevertheless," Catherine insisted, "I find the air in here rather close. Might we have a window opened? Perhaps this girl could see to it and take a moment for herself on the veranda while doing so." Jeremiah, clearly sensing the tension, nodded quickly. "An excellent idea, my dear. Eliza, please open the east window and take a brief respite. The night air will do you good." Grateful for the unexpected reprieve, Eliza moved to the tall windows and unlocked the latch. Cool October air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. She stepped onto the veranda as instructed, drawing her first deep breath of the evening. Behind her, through the open window, the conversation continued. Mr. Henderson's wife was chattering about a recent visit to Lexington, deliberately steering the topic away from Master Wallace's breeding program. Eliza leaned against the railing, savoring her moment of solitude. "It's unconscionable," said a quiet voice beside her. Eliza startled. Catherine Wallace had slipped out through a side door and now stood in the shadows of the veranda, her dinner napkin still clutched in one hand. "Ma'am." Eliza kept her eyes lowered, heart racing at this unexpected development. "My husband told me his father was old-fashioned in his views." Catherine's voice trembled slightly with controlled anger. "He did not prepare me for this." Eliza remained silent, unsure how to respond to the young mistress. Any word from her might be reported back to Master Wallace, any perceived complaint punished severely. "Look at me, please," Catherine said, her tone gentler. Reluctantly, Eliza raised her eyes to meet Catherine's. What she saw there surprised her, not pity, which she had learned to despise, but a clear, burning indignation. "My father was an abolitionist in Philadelphia," Catherine said, the words barely above a whisper. "I grew up attending meetings, reading the literature. I thought—" She paused, glancing back toward the dining room. "Jeremiah led me to believe he shared progressive views on the peculiar institution, that in time changes would come to Rosehill." "The master is set in his ways," Eliza replied carefully. "So I see." Catherine's mouth tightened. "This breeding program he speaks of so casually, it's happening now, here." Eliza hesitated, then gave the smallest of nods. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "I have connections in Cincinnati," she said, her voice so low Eliza had to strain to hear it. "Friends who assist those seeking freedom. If someone from Rosehill were to journey north, they might find help in a house with yellow shutters on 3rd Street, a Mrs. Adelaide Parker." Before Eliza could process this extraordinary information, the side door opened again. Jeremiah Wallace stepped onto the veranda, his expression concerned. "Catherine, father is asking for you. The dessert has been served." Catherine straightened, smoothing her skirts. "Of course, I was just getting some air and chatting with—" She faltered, realizing she didn't know Eliza's name. "Eliza, ma'am," Eliza supplied quietly. "Yes, Eliza was telling me about the gardens here. I'm quite interested in botany, you know." Catherine moved toward her husband, placing a hand on his arm. "Perhaps tomorrow I might tour the grounds properly." Jeremiah smiled, clearly relieved that his wife was adapting to Rosehill. "Of course, my dear. Whatever you wish." As they disappeared back into the house, Eliza stood frozen on the veranda, her mind reeling from the encounter. Catherine Wallace had just handed her something precious and dangerous, information that could lead to freedom, but could also lead to disaster if misused or discovered. Eliza returned to the dining room to continue her serving duties, but everything had changed. The casual cruelty of Master Wallace's dinner conversation no longer had the power to crush her spirit, because now she had something he couldn't take away: hope and a destination. That night, as she lay in her pallet in the cabin, Eliza mentally revised her escape plan. She would still leave during the new moon, following the route Sarah had described. But now she had a specific destination beyond the immediate escape: Cincinnati, a yellow-shuttered house on 3rd Street, and a Mrs. Adelaide Parker who might help her find true freedom. 11 days. She had 11 days to prepare, to memorize the route, to gather what meager supplies she could hide away. 11 days until she would either take her first steps toward freedom or meet a fate worse than the one Master Wallace had planned for her. Outside the cabin, an owl called again. Once, twice, 3 times. To Eliza, it now sounded like a countdown. 7 days until the new moon. Eliza moved through her work like a sleepwalker, her body present but her mind constantly calculating, planning, preparing. She had begun secreting away small amounts of food, a handful of dried corn here, a piece of hardtack there, wrapped in a scrap of cloth and hidden in a hollow tree stump behind the cabin. The weather had turned cooler, which was both blessing and curse. The chill nights would make travel more uncomfortable, but would also keep the slave patrols closer to their fires and less inclined to range widely through the woods. "You still planning it?" Sarah whispered, as they hauled water from the well to the washhouse. They were momentarily alone, the overseer's attention focused on breaking up a dispute between 2 field hands. Eliza nodded once, sharply. "The new moon!" Sarah's face was a mask of worry. "I've been asking around, quiet-like. The patroller's been seeing signs of abolitionists in the county. They're watching the roads more careful than usual." This news sent a spike of fear through Eliza, but she had come too far in her planning to turn back. "Then I'll avoid the roads." Follow the creek like you said. You can't travel alone, Sarah insisted. It ain't safe for a woman. I have no choice. Sarah glanced toward the cabin they shared. Rebecca's been asking questions. I think she suspects something. She may want to come with you. Rebecca Morgan was Eliza's first cousin, 18 years old, and already being eyed by Master Wallace for his breeding program. The two women had been close as children, but in recent years, their different assignments, Eliza in the house until recently, Rebecca always in the fields, had created distance between them. It's too dangerous, Eliza protested. Two are more likely to be caught than one. Two can watch each other's back, Sarah countered. Talk to her. Tonight. Before Eliza could argue further, Mr. Daniels's voice cut across the yard, ordering them back to work. The conversation was over, but Sarah's suggestion lingered in Eliza's mind throughout the day. The idea of having a companion on the terrifying journey ahead was tempting, yet it also meant being responsible for another life besides her own. That evening, as the inhabitants of the cabin prepared for sleep, Eliza found a moment alone with Rebecca near the small fireplace where they warmed their hands before bed. "Sarah says you've been asking questions," Eliza said quietly, watching her cousin's face in the flickering light. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with caution. "Maybe. What kind of questions you mean?" "About leaving, about finding the path north." For a long moment Rebecca was still, her breathing the only sign she had heard. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Master's been looking at me the same way he looks at you. I heard him tell Mr. Daniels I'm to be settled with Thomas come spring." Thomas was a field hand, known for his size and strength, nearly 40 years old with 3 previous wives who had borne him 11 children altogether. The thought of Rebecca being forced into such an arrangement made Eliza's resolve strengthen. "I'm going," Eliza whispered. "New moon, 7 days from now." Rebecca's hand found hers in the shadows. "Take me with you." The decision should have required more thought, more careful weighing of the increased risks against the potential benefits of traveling together. But looking into her cousin's eyes, seeing the same desperate determination that she herself felt, Eliza knew there was only one answer. "Be ready," she murmured. "Tell no one, not even Sarah." Rebecca squeezed her hand once, a silent pact sealed. The next morning brought unexpected news that rippled through the slave quarters. Jeremiah and Catherine Wallace would be extending their stay at Rosehill for at least another 2 weeks. Rumors suggested that Catherine was contemplating changes to the mansion's decor and wanted to oversee the initial planning. For Eliza, this development was concerning. More people in the main house meant more eyes that might notice preparations or absence. Yet it also presented a potential opportunity. The chaos of renovation discussions might provide cover for certain activities that would otherwise draw attention. Later that day, Eliza was called back to the main house to help Mrs. Harper inventory linens for the extended stay. As she counted sheets in the upstairs hallway, Catherine Wallace emerged from the guest bedroom she shared with Jeremiah. "Oh!" Catherine seemed startled to find Eliza there. She glanced around quickly, confirming they were alone, then lowered her voice. "I was hoping to speak with you again." Eliza curtsied, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "Yes, ma'am. My husband tells me you were born here at Rosehill." Catherine's voice was casual, but her intent gaze suggested the conversation had a purpose beyond small talk. "Yes, ma'am. My mother and grandmother before me as well." Catherine nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "And you've never known any other home?" "No, ma'am." Eliza kept her responses minimal, uncertain where this conversation was heading. That must make the thought of change quite frightening. Catherine's careful emphasis made her meaning clear. She was probing about escape, about whether Eliza had considered the information shared during their veranda conversation. Before Eliza could formulate a safe response, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Catherine immediately stepped back, raising her voice to a normal volume. "Yes, the blue guest room will need fresh linens. See to it, please." She turned away just as Mrs. Harper appeared at the top of the stairs. "Is everything satisfactory, Mrs. Wallace?" the housekeeper asked. "Perfectly, thank you. Eliza has been most helpful." With a final, meaningful glance at Eliza, Catherine retreated to her room. That interaction left Eliza uneasy throughout the day. Catherine Wallace's interest seemed genuine, but any connection to the master's family was dangerous, especially for someone planning escape. Even well-intentioned help could go awry, and Eliza had no way to be certain that the young mistress wasn't simply gathering information to pass to her husband or father-in-law. 6 days until the new moon. 5, 4. On the third day before their planned departure, disaster struck. Eliza was returning from the fields when she noticed unusual activity around the slave cabins. Men on horseback circled the area, while Master Wallace himself stood with Mr. Daniels, their expressions grim. Sarah intercepted Eliza before she could reach the cabin they shared. "They found your cache," she hissed, pulling Eliza behind the smokehouse. "The food you've been hiding. One of the children was playing and found it." Ice-cold fear washed through Eliza's body. "Did they say who it belonged to?" "Not yet. They're searching all the cabins now, looking for more evidence." Sarah's eyes were wide with fear. "Eliza, they have the dogs out." The bloodhounds were Master Wallace's pride. 2 massive beasts trained specifically to track humans through the Kentucky wilderness. Their presence meant the master was taking the discovery seriously, preparing for a potential chase. "Rebecca?" Eliza whispered. "Still in the fields, far side of the property. She doesn't know." Eliza's mind raced. The discovery of the hidden food meant their plan was compromised, even if no one had yet connected it specifically to her. The searches would be thorough, the watch doubled. Waiting for the new moon was no longer an option. They would have to leave tonight, ready or not. "Listen carefully," Eliza whispered. "When Rebecca returns, tell her to meet me at the lightning-struck oak after first dark. Not the new moon. Tonight. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, her expression agonized. "What about you? Where will you go until then?" "I'll hide in the old tobacco barn. The one they don't use anymore. They won't search there yet." Eliza squeezed Sarah's hands. "If we don't make it—" "Don't!" Sarah cut her off. "Don't say it. You'll make it. Both of you." As darkness fell, Eliza crouched in the abandoned tobacco barn, listening to distant voices as the search continued. From her hiding place, she could see lanterns moving between the cabins and hear the occasional bark of the hounds. Master Wallace was taking no chances. He knew that the hidden food meant someone was planning to run. The night grew darker, a sliver of waning moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Eliza waited until the searchers moved to the western edge of the quarters before slipping out of the barn and making her way toward the creek that marked Rose Hill's northern boundary. Every shadow seemed to harbor a patroller, every rustle in the underbrush the approach of the hounds. Eliza moved as quietly as she could, using all the knowledge of Rose Hill's landscape that a lifetime there had given her. She crossed open ground when necessary, freezing at the slightest sound, then continuing her careful progress toward freedom. The creek appeared before her, a silver ribbon in the darkness. Eliza followed it upstream as Sarah had instructed, counting her steps, watching for the lightning-struck oak that would mark the boundary between Rose Hill and the neighboring Hargrove property. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than one, she spotted it, a massive oak with its top sheared away by some long-ago storm. This was the meeting place, where Rebecca should join her for the journey north. Eliza concealed herself in a thicket nearby and settled in to wait. An hour passed, then another. No sign of Rebecca. Cold dread settled in Eliza's stomach. Had her cousin been caught? Had Sarah been unable to deliver the message? Or had Rebecca simply lost her nerve? As the night deepened toward midnight, Eliza faced an agonizing decision: continue alone or return to search for Rebecca. Returning meant almost certain capture. The alarm was already raised, the dogs already tracking. But leaving meant abandoning her cousin to whatever fate awaited her at Rosehill. The snap of a twig brought Eliza to full alert. She crouched lower in her hiding place, scarcely daring to breathe. "Eliza!" The whisper was barely audible over the burble of the creek. "Eliza, are you here?" Relief flooded through her. "Rebecca?" A shadow detached itself from the darkness. Rebecca, with another smaller figure beside her. "I brought Hannah," Rebecca whispered as they drew closer. "They were questioning her about the food. Said they'd whip her if she didn't tell what she knew. I couldn't leave her." Hannah Morgan was just 14, Rebecca's younger sister and Eliza's cousin. Her addition to their escape party complicated matters enormously. 3 would be harder to hide than 2, and Hannah had never been strong, suffering from a weakness in her lungs that left her breathless after exertion. But looking at the girl's terrified face in the faint moonlight, Eliza knew there was no sending her back. "Did anyone follow you?" Rebecca shook her head. "We came through the creek bed, walked in the water to hide our scent from the dogs." It was a smart precaution, one that might buy them valuable time. "We need to move," Eliza said. "Follow the creek until we reach Hargrove Land, then head north toward the church with the blue door." They moved as quickly as Hannah's condition allowed, staying in the shallow creek when possible, taking to the banks only when the water grew too deep. The night sounds of the Kentucky wilderness surrounded them. The hoot of owls, the distant howl of what might have been a wolf or might have been a hound, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. After an hour of travel, Hannah began to lag, her breathing becoming labored. "I need to rest," she gasped, "just for a minute." They found a fallen log beside the creek and helped Hannah sit. Rebecca rubbed her sister's back in slow circles, the way their mother had done when Hannah's breathing grew troubled. "We've come maybe 3 miles, Eliza estimated, peering into the darkness ahead. "Need to cover at least 4 more before dawn." "She can't keep this pace," Rebecca said quietly. "I can," Hannah insisted between wheezing breaths. "I won't slow you down. Promise." A distant sound froze them all, the unmistakable baying of hounds. Master Wallace had set the dogs on their trail. "They found our scent," Eliza whispered. "We need to move, now." Hannah struggled to her feet, determination overcoming her physical limitations. "Which way?" Eliza pointed north. "Away from the creek. We need to find the road Sarah mentioned." They moved as quickly as they dared through the darkened forest, the sounds of pursuit growing gradually louder behind them. Hannah stumbled often, each time rising with less strength, but refusing any suggestion of rest. The trees began to thin, and suddenly they found themselves at the edge of a dirt road, little more than a cart track, but clearly the fork Sarah had described. The less traveled eastern path was barely visible in the darkness. "This way," Eliza urged, helping Hannah over a fallen branch. The baying of the hounds seemed to be coming from multiple directions now. The dogs had split up, widening their search. A more terrifying sound joined them, men's voices calling to each other as they closed in on their prey. "We won't outrun them," Rebecca said, the truth they all knew finally spoken aloud. "Not with Hannah." Eliza made a swift decision. "You two hide in those bushes," she said, pointing to a dense thicket. "I'll lead them away, then circle back." "No!" both cousins protested at once. "It's the only way," Eliza insisted. "I know these woods better than either of you. I can lose them and find you again." She didn't add that if she was caught, Master Wallace's punishment would focus solely on her, perhaps sparing her cousins if they remained hidden. Before they could argue further, Eliza removed her headscarf and pressed it into Rebecca's hands. "For the dogs to follow my scent. Now hide, and don't come out no matter what you hear." "And," with a final glance at her cousins, Eliza darted across the road and into the woods on the opposite side, deliberately snapping twigs and disturbing the undergrowth to leave a clear trail. Behind her, she saw Rebecca pulling Hannah into the thicket, the younger girl's face streaked with silent tears. Eliza ran east along the road for 100 yards, then plunged back into the forest, moving perpendicular to their original path. The voices behind her grew louder, the baying of the hounds more excited as they caught her fresher scent. She pushed herself faster, ignoring the branches that whipped at her face and arms, focusing only on drawing the pursuit away from her cousins. A root caught her foot, sending her sprawling into a shallow gully. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, but Eliza forced herself upright. She couldn't afford to be caught, not just for her own sake, but for Rebecca and Hannah's as well. The sound of hoofbeats joined the cacophony of pursuit. The mounted patrollers had found the road and were closing in quickly. Eliza limped forward, each step sending shards of pain up her leg, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A clearing appeared ahead, and beyond it, the silhouette of a small building with a peaked roof. The church Sarah had mentioned, its blue door invisible in the darkness but its shape unmistakable. A faint light glowed in an eastern window. The signal. It was safe to approach. Eliza had almost reached the edge of the clearing when rough hands seized her from behind. She screamed, more in frustration than fear, as she was thrown to the ground. Above her loomed the massive figure of Mr. Daniels, his face twisted with triumph in the faint moonlight. "Thought you'd run, did you?" he snarled, pinning her with a knee to her back. "Master Wallace is offering $20 to whoever brings you back alive. Where are the others?" "There are no others," Eliza gasped, the weight on her spine making it difficult to breathe. "I'm alone." "Liar. We found 3 sets of tracks." Mr. Daniels leaned closer, his breath hot on her neck. "Tell me where they're hiding, and maybe the master won't have your back flayed clean off." "I'm alone," Eliza repeated, closing her eyes against the pain and despair that threatened to overwhelm her. So close to the church, to potential safety, only to be captured at the final moment. The baying of the hounds grew deafening as they surrounded her, their massive forms visible in her peripheral vision. 2 other patrollers arrived, dismounting to secure Eliza's wrists with rope. "The master wants her back at Rose Hill tonight," one said, binding the rope so tightly that Eliza's fingers immediately began to tingle. "What about the others?" Mr. Daniels asked, finally removing his knee from Eliza's back. "Keep searching. They can't have gone far." The patroller hauled Eliza to her feet, ignoring her gasp of pain as weight settled on her injured ankle. "I'll take this one back myself. $20 is $20. As they dragged her toward a waiting horse, a flash of movement caught Eliza's eye. The church door had opened, spilling golden lamplight across the clearing. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a shotgun clearly visible in his hands. "That's far enough," called a deep voice. "Release that woman." The patrollers froze, instinctively drawing closer together. "This is plantation business," Mr. Daniels called back. "No concern of yours, preacher." "All souls are my concern." The man stepped forward, his features becoming visible. An older black man with grey-streaked hair and the collar of a minister. "And that woman has claimed sanctuary in my church." "She ain't claimed nothing," the patroller holding Eliza snapped. "She's property of Thaddeus Wallace, caught in the act of running away." "She has reached my property," the minister replied calmly, "and by the laws of God, if not those of Kentucky, she has the right to seek shelter here." Mr. Daniels spat on the ground. "Your property, is it? Last I heard, coloreds can't own land in this county." "The deed is in the name of the Northern Baptist Convention," the minister said, taking another step forward. The shotgun in his hands never wavered. "And while I abhor violence, I will defend this sanctuary and those who seek it." A tense silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the restless movements of the horses and the low growling of the hounds. Eliza stood perfectly still, scarcely daring to hope that this unexpected intervention might change her fate. Finally, Mr. Daniels made a disgusted sound. "It ain't worth dying over. Let Wallace sort it out with the law tomorrow." He gestured to the patroller holding Eliza. "Bring her. We're leaving." "I said," the minister repeated, raising the shotgun slightly, "release that woman." Something in his tone, absolute certainty without a trace of fear, made the patrollers hesitate. The man holding Eliza looked to Mr. Daniels for direction, his grip on her arm slackening slightly. A new sound broke the standoff. Hoofbeats approaching from the direction of Rosehill. A moment later, a rider burst into the clearing, pulling his lathered horse to a halt between the patrollers and the church. Jeremiah Wallace swung down from the saddle, his normally immaculate appearance dishevelled, his expression grim. "Daniels, Peterson, release Miss Morgan immediately." The patrollers stared in disbelief. "But, sir," Mr. Daniels protested, "your father—" "My father is not here," Jeremiah cut him off. "I am acting with his authority in this matter." Confusion clear on their faces, the patrollers nevertheless obeyed, releasing Eliza's arm and stepping back. She swayed unsteadily, her injured ankle barely supporting her weight. Jeremiah turned to the minister. "Reverend Bishop, I presume. My wife spoke highly of your sermons during her time in Philadelphia." The minister lowered his shotgun slightly, surprise evident in his expression. "Mrs. Wallace is acquainted with my work?" "More than acquainted." Jeremiah glanced at Eliza. "She requested specifically that I intervene in this matter. It seems my father's management practices do not align with her moral sensibilities, nor, if I'm honest, with my own." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to Eliza. "Your manumission papers, Miss Morgan. Signed and witnessed this evening. You are legally a free woman." Eliza stared at the paper in her hands, unable to comprehend what was happening. "But how?" "My wife can be very persuasive," Jeremiah said with a tight smile, "and my father's health has been declining. When presented with certain financial incentives and the promise that this situation would remain private, he agreed to sign." He looked back toward the forest. "There are others, I believe?" Eliza hesitated, unwilling to reveal Rebecca and Hannah's location even now. "Their papers are here as well," Jeremiah added quietly. "Rebecca and Hannah Morgan, all three of you purchased and freed, with sufficient funds provided for passage to Cincinnati." Tears filled Eliza's eyes as the reality of what was happening finally penetrated her shock. "Why would you do this?" Jeremiah's expression darkened. "Because I have seen my father's ledgers. I have read his breeding records. And while I was raised to believe certain things about the natural order, I cannot—" He stopped, composing himself. "Let us simply say that my wife has opened my eyes to certain moral truths that I can no longer ignore." He turned back to the patrollers, who had been watching the exchange with growing confusion. "You may return to Rosehill and inform my father that the matter has been resolved. The Morgans are no longer his concern, or yours." Mr. Daniels opened his mouth as if to protest, then thought better of it. With a curt nod, he gathered the reins of his horse and mounted. The other patroller followed suit, and they rode back toward Rosehill, the disappointed hounds trailing behind them. Once they had gone, Reverend Bishop stepped fully into the clearing. "Miss Morgan, can you walk? Your friends will be worried." "They're hiding near the fork in the road," Eliza said, still dazed by the sudden reversal of her fortune. "My cousin Hannah is unwell. Her breathing is troubled." "I'll fetch them," Jeremiah offered, remounting his horse. "Reverend, please see to Miss Morgan's injuries. I'll return shortly." As the hoofbeats faded, Reverend Bishop gently supported Eliza toward the church. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Tonight, it seems, he has worked through the conscience of a slaveholder's son, and the influence of his wife," Eliza added, thinking of Catherine Wallace's whispered words on the veranda. The yellow-shuttered house in Cincinnati, the name Mrs. Adelaide Parker, had that been part of a plan already in motion? Inside the church, a small sanctuary welcomed them with the warm glow of oil lamps and the smell of beeswax candles. A woman emerged from a side room, her dark skin and practical dress marking her as likely another fugitive who had found sanctuary here. "Martha, this is Miss Morgan," Reverend Bishop said. "She'll be joining tomorrow's group heading north. Please tend to her ankle while I watch for the others." As Martha helped her to a bench and began examining her swollen ankle, Eliza finally allowed herself to believe what had happened. The manumission papers in her hand were real. Freedom, purchased and legal, not stolen in the night but granted, however reluctantly, by Master Wallace himself. And not just for her, but for Rebecca and Hannah as well. Outside, hoofbeats approached again. Moments later, Jeremiah Wallace entered the church, supporting Hannah between himself and Rebecca. The younger girl's breathing was labored, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes widened with wonder at the sight of Eliza seated safely in the sanctuary. "Eliza!" Rebecca rushed forward, embracing her cousin with desperate strength. "We thought they'd caught you, taken you back to Rose Hill." "They tried," Eliza said, gesturing toward Jeremiah. Mr. Wallace intervened. Hannah collapsed onto the bench beside Eliza, wheezing but smiling through her tears. "We're really free, truly." Jeremiah nodded solemnly. "Truly. Tomorrow, Reverend Bishop will escort you to the next station on the Underground Railroad. From there, you'll travel to Cincinnati, where my wife's contacts will help you establish new lives as free women." He reached into his coat and produced a small purse, which he handed to Eliza. "This should cover your immediate needs. There will be more waiting in Cincinnati." "Why us?" Rebecca asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you choose to free us and not others?" A shadow passed over Jeremiah's face. "My father's breeding program focused on your family line specifically. When Catherine learned of this," he shook his head, unable to continue. "When Mrs. Wallace learned of Master Wallace's plans for you," Reverend Bishop finished gently, "she could not, in good conscience, allow it to continue. Mr. Wallace here had to choose between his wife's moral principles and his father's business practices." "It was not a difficult choice in the end," Jeremiah said quietly. "Though I regret I cannot do more at present." The implication was clear. Jeremiah Wallace was taking a stand against his father's most egregious practices, but was not yet prepared to dismantle the entire system of bondage at Rose Hill. For the Morgans, it was enough. For others still enslaved there, freedom remained a distant dream. "What will happen to Sarah?" Eliza asked suddenly, thinking of the woman who had been like a mother to her. Jeremiah hesitated. "I cannot say. My influence with my father extends only so far. But know that your escape has been noticed by others at Rose Hill. Perhaps it will plant seeds that may grow in time." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "I must return before my absence is remarked upon. Reverend Bishop will see to your journey from here. He seemed to struggle for words. "I wish you well, Miss Morgan. All of you." With that, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Eliza sat in the warm light of the sanctuary, her cousins beside her, freedom papers in her hand, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope not just for herself, but for all those still held in bondage throughout the South. If Jeremiah Wallace could change, perhaps others could too. Perhaps freedom would come, not just through daring escapes in the night, but through the awakening of consciences, one heart at a time. Outside, an owl called once, twice, 3 times, but to Eliza's ears it no longer sounded like a countdown. It sounded like a beginning. April 1853, Cincinnati, Ohio. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows of the small schoolhouse on the outskirts of Cincinnati, illuminating the rows of eager faces looking up at Eliza Morgan. At 31, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that came from 12 years of freedom and the satisfaction of meaningful work. "Today," she told her students, "a mix of free-born black children and those who, like herself, had escaped bondage. We will continue our study of the Constitution. Who can tell me which amendment abolished slavery?" A small girl in the front row raised her hand tentatively. "There isn't one, Miss Morgan. Not yet." Eliza nodded, pleased. "That's correct, Mary. Despite what many believe, the Constitution still permits slavery in certain states. This is why our work and your education remains so vital. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the day's lessons. As the children gathered their slates and books, Eliza moved among them, answering last-minute questions and offering encouragement. Teaching had become her calling in the years since her escape from Rosehill, a way to ensure that knowledge, the most powerful tool for liberation, was passed to the next generation. After the last student had departed, Eliza tidied the classroom and gathered her own materials. Through the window, she could see Rebecca waiting in the schoolyard, her face turned toward the spring sunshine. At 30, Rebecca had become a skilled seamstress, her embroidery work sought after by Cincinnati's wealthiest families. The sisters often walked home together, their modest house just a half-mile from the school. "How was your day?" Rebecca asked as Eliza joined her. "Productive. The older students have begun preparing speeches for the Emancipation Day celebration." Eliza linked arms with her cousin as they walked. "And yours?" "Mrs. Whitmore commissioned a full set of handkerchiefs for her daughter's wedding. The pay is generous." Rebecca's expression sobered. "I received another letter from Martha in Philadelphia. She's heard news from Kentucky." Eliza's heart quickened. News from Kentucky often meant word of those left behind at Rosehill, information gleaned through the network of free blacks, sympathetic whites, and the Underground Railroad that continued to operate despite increasingly harsh fugitive slave laws. "Sarah?" Eliza asked softly, thinking of the woman who had helped make their escape possible. Rebecca shook her head. "No word of her specifically. But Martha writes that Thaddeus Wallace passed away last winter." Eliza stopped walking, absorbing this information. Master Wallace, the man who had seen her as nothing more than breeding stock, who had recorded her family line in his ledgers as if they were livestock, was dead. She searched her heart for how this news made her feel and found neither joy nor sorrow, only a distant sense of closure. "Jeremiah has taken full ownership of Rosehill," Rebecca continued. "Martha's sources say he's made changes. Nothing as dramatic as widespread manumission, but conditions have improved. The breeding program has been discontinued." Eliza resumed walking, her thoughts turning to Catherine Wallace and her quiet intervention 12 years ago. "I wonder how much influence his wife continues to have." "Enough, apparently. They have 3 children now, all being raised with noticeably different views on the peculiar institution than their grandfather held." They turned onto their street, where their small but well-maintained house stood among similar homes owned by free blacks and progressive whites. Hannah was likely already inside, having finished her day's work at the printing office, where she had become a skilled typesetter. Her lung condition had improved in the Ohio climate, though it still troubled her in the damp of winter. Before they reached their gate, Eliza noticed a carriage parked nearby, an expensive one with a matched pair of bay horses and a liveried driver who stood at attention beside it. "Are we expecting visitors?" Rebecca murmured. Eliza shook her head, a sense of unease prickling at the back of her neck. Even after 12 years of freedom, the sight of wealth and privilege still triggered wariness. In a nation where the Fugitive Slave Act remained in force, no formerly enslaved person could ever feel entirely secure. As they approached their home, the front door opened. Hannah appeared, her expression a mixture of anxiety and excitement. "Eliza, Rebecca, we have guests." Behind her appeared a tall, elegant woman whose auburn hair was now streaked with silver at the temples. Though 12 years had passed, Eliza recognized her immediately. Catherine Wallace. "Miss Morgan," Catherine said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "Though I believe it's Professor Morgan now, according to my sources." Eliza instinctively straightened her posture, her teacher's dignity coming to the fore. "Mrs. Wallace, this is unexpected. I apologize for arriving unannounced. We only reached Cincinnati yesterday, and I was determined not to leave without seeing you." Catherine gestured toward the open door. "Might we speak inside? I bring news that may interest you." After a moment's hesitation, Eliza nodded, leading the way into their modest parlor. A young woman, perhaps 17 or 18, rose from a chair as they entered. Her features immediately identified her as Catherine and Jeremiah's daughter, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's strong jaw. "This is my eldest, Charlotte," Catherine said. "Charlotte, these are the Morgan sisters I've told you about." The girl curtsied politely. "It's an honor to meet you all. Mother has spoken often of your courage." Hannah had prepared tea, and as they settled around the small parlor table, Eliza studied Catherine Wallis closely. The pampered northern bride had been transformed by time and experience into a woman of obvious capability and purpose. Her silk dress practical despite its quality, her manner direct rather than genteel. "I'll come straight to the point," Catherine said after taking a sip of tea. "Rose Hill has changed since Thaddeus's passing. Jeremiah has implemented significant reforms, not enough by my standards, but progress nonetheless. The most brutal overseers have been dismissed. Families are no longer separated, and as of last month, a small school has been established for the children." "A school?" Eliza couldn't hide her surprise. Education for enslaved people was still prohibited by law in Kentucky. "Officially, it's a Sunday Bible study," Catherine said with a small smile. "But reading is reading, whether the text is scripture or Seneca. We're in need of a qualified teacher, someone who understands both education and the particular circumstances of our students." The implication hung in the air between them. Eliza set down her teacup carefully. "You're asking me to return to Rose Hill. I'm asking you to consider an opportunity," Catherine corrected gently. "You would come as a free woman, employed with a proper salary, housing, and the protection of the Wallis name. The legal documents have already been prepared." Charlotte leaned forward, her young face earnest. "Professor Morgan, I've been assisting with the lessons, but I lack your expertise and experience. These children deserve a real education, the kind that might prepare them for the freedom we hope is coming." "Hope?" Rebecca asked sharply. "You hope freedom is coming, while your family continues to hold people in bondage." Catherine did not flinch from the accusation. "The situation is complicated, as I'm sure you understand. Jeremiah is working within a system he inherited, moving as quickly as prudence allows. He has freed 17 people in the past year alone, though we've kept this quiet to avoid alarming our neighbors. And the others," Hannah asked, "those not yet freed, are being prepared for eventual emancipation through education, skills training, and in some cases, resettlement assistance." Catherine's gaze returned to Eliza. "This is why we need someone like you, Professor Morgan. Someone who understands what knowledge means to those who have been systematically denied it." Eliza's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. To return to Rose Hill, the place of nightmares, the place she had fled in terror 12 years ago, seemed unthinkable. Yet the idea of bringing education to those still held there, of continuing the work of liberation from within. "What of Sarah?" she asked suddenly. "Sarah Johnson. She would be in her 50s now." Catherine and Charlotte exchanged a glance. "She still lives at Rose Hill," Catherine said carefully. "She serves as housekeeper now that Mrs. Harper has retired. Her health is declining. She asks about you often." The thought of Sarah, still at Rose Hill, growing old in bondage while Eliza enjoyed freedom, sent a pang through her heart. "And the others? Those who helped us escape?" "Some have been freed," Catherine replied. "Others are among those being prepared for manumission. Jeremiah moves cautiously to avoid drawing attention from neighbors who do not share our views on the institution." Rebecca made a sound of frustration. "Caution serves the master well, but does little for those still enslaved." "I understand your skepticism, Miss Morgan," Catherine said. "In your position, I would feel the same. But consider this. Kentucky sits on the border between slavery and freedom. What happens there affects the entire nation. Every mind changed, every person freed, shifts the balance." Charlotte added, Father says the country is heading toward a reckoning on this issue, that war may come within the decade if compromise continues to fail. He believes education is the only way to ensure that when freedom does come, whether through legislation or conflict, those who have been enslaved will be prepared to claim their full rights as citizens. The young woman's words held a conviction that reminded Eliza of her own students, the belief that education was not merely about letters and numbers, but about human dignity and potential. It was the same belief that had driven her to become a teacher in the first place. "May I have time to consider your proposal?" Eliza asked finally. "Of course." Catherine reached into her reticule and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Here are the details of the position, including compensation and terms. We'll remain in Cincinnati for 3 days before returning to Kentucky." After the Wallaces had departed, promising to call again before leaving the city, the Morgan sisters sat in silence, the proposal hanging between them like a challenge. "You can't seriously be considering this," Rebecca said at last, her voice tight with concern. "To return to that place, after everything we suffered there." "I'm considering what good might be done," Eliza replied quietly. "What Sarah and others like her might gain from education brought to them, since they cannot seek it themselves." Hannah, always the peacemaker, laid a hand on each of their arms. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you, but promise you'll think carefully before answering." That night, Eliza sat alone at her small desk, reading Catherine Wallace's proposal by lamplight. The terms were generous: a proper salary, independent housing on Rose Hill property, but separate from the slave quarters, and most importantly, complete autonomy in developing the curriculum for the school. A separate note, handwritten by Catherine, added personal context. "Professor Morgan, what I could not say in front of others is this: Jeremiah and I are engaged in work more significant than mere reform of Rose Hill. Our home has become a station on the Underground Railroad, providing temporary shelter to those traveling north. This work must remain absolutely secret, for obvious reasons, but it is the true measure of our commitment to the cause of freedom. Should you accept the teaching position, you would be welcomed into this confidence, with opportunities to assist in ways your unique knowledge of Rose Hill and its surroundings would make invaluable. I understand what I am asking of you, to return to a place of painful memories, to work alongside those who once claimed ownership of your very being. It is no small thing. But great changes often require great courage, and you, Eliza Morgan, have already demonstrated courage beyond measure." With deepest respect, Catherine Wallace Eliza folded the letter carefully, her decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. To return to Rose Hill, not as property, but as a free woman, a teacher, and potentially an agent of the Underground Railroad, it would be a reclamation of power, a transformation of fear into purpose. The next morning, she informed her sisters of her decision. Rebecca protested vehemently, while Hannah offered quiet concern, but both ultimately accepted that Eliza's mind was made. When Catherine and Charlotte called the following day, Eliza presented her answer, along with certain conditions of her own, including regular correspondence with her sisters and the freedom to resign the position at any time. 2 weeks later, Eliza Morgan stood once again on the road leading to Rose Hill Plantation. The Kentucky spring had painted the landscape in vibrant greens and delicate blossoms, so different from the autumn night when she had fled through darkness and fear. The Wallace mansion still crowned the gentle rise, its white columns now softened by climbing roses, but it no longer loomed in her imagination as a place of terror. Catherine rode beside her in an open carriage, with Charlotte on the opposite bench. As they approached the main house, figures appeared on the veranda. Jeremiah Wallace, now in his mid-40s with streaks of grey in his dark hair, and beside him, a slight black woman whose dignified bearing was unmistakable despite the passage of years. "Sarah," Eliza whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. The carriage had barely stopped before Eliza descended, moving swiftly toward the steps. Sarah came down to meet her, her lined face transformed by joy, her arms opening to welcome the girl who had escaped to freedom and returned as a woman of accomplishment and purpose. "You came back," Sarah murmured as they embraced. "My Eliza came back to finish what we started," Eliza replied, her voice steady with conviction, "to bring light to dark places." Over Sarah's shoulder, she met Jeremiah Wallace's gaze. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals rather than master and former property. In that moment, Eliza understood that her return to Rosehill was neither surrender nor compromise, but the continuation of a journey begun in fear and now undertaken in strength. The small schoolhouse stood at the edge of the quarters, a simple structure with large windows to admit light and air. Inside, rough-hewn benches awaited students who had never been permitted to learn. Books waited to be opened, minds waited to be awakened. Tomorrow, Eliza would begin the work she had been preparing for all her life, using education as a tool of liberation, helping others forge their own paths to freedom. As the sun set over Rosehill that evening, Eliza stood in the doorway of her new cottage, watching the familiar Kentucky landscape transform in the fading light. The land itself was neither good nor evil. It was what humans did upon it that mattered. Where once a man had built an empire on the backs of those he claimed to own, now seeds of change were being planted, taking root in the same soil that had absorbed so many tears. Eliza thought of the children she would meet tomorrow, whose lives might be transformed by the power of literacy and knowledge. She thought of the fugitives who might pass through Rosehill on their journey north, finding unexpected allies in the very house that had once represented the heart of their oppression. She thought of Sarah, whose quiet resistance had helped make her own escape possible, and who would now witness the fruits of that courage. The old owl called from the woods, once, twice, 3 times, just as it had on that October night 12 years ago. But now Eliza heard not a countdown to escape, but a summons to return, to reclaim, to transform. She had left Rosehill as property fleeing in the night. She had returned as a free woman walking in daylight, head held high, purpose in every step. The silent horror of 1841 had given way to the quiet revolution of 1853, and Eliza Morgan, once counted among Master Wallace's breeding stock, now stood as living testimony to an essential truth, that freedom begins in the mind long before it is granted by law, and that education is not merely a privilege, but the most fundamental human right, the key that unlocks all others. As darkness settled over Kentucky, Eliza lit a lamp in her window, a beacon of hope and a declaration of presence. She was home, not to submit, but to subvert, not to serve, but to lead, not to forget the past, but to forge a different future. The master of Kentucky was dead, but his granddaughters had survived him. And in that survival, in that return, lay the most profound victory of all.